Welcome to our continuing journey in talking about the church when it gets it right. The characteristic we're dealing with this week comes from my experience of being in the pew for a considerable percentage of the years I was in active ministry as a pastor in the United Methodist Church. For 30 years, I was primarily in the pew, not in the pulpit on Sunday morning. I was a conference program director for 5 years. I was a college president for 4. I was a bishop for 16. Sometimes I was a guest preacher, but primarily I was in the pew. In my journey as a worshiper, I had the experience many times of attending worship, knowing what was on my mind was on the mind of every worshiper of any age in the congregation with whom I was worshiping. Maybe it was a global, natural disaster, sometimes a controversial local issue. One time it was a severe drop in the financial markets affecting everyone in the pew. Whatever the case might be, the life situation of everyone in the pew was often ignored, neglected, and never mentioned. Each time this happened, I went away empty. The worshiping church was not relevant to my life. On the other hand, I worshiped as a visitor in a congregation on the Sunday after the behavior of a few contaminated the event of the high school junior senior prom on the previous Friday night. In the pastoral prayer, it was referred to in a very appropriate way, and at the beginning of the sermon, the pastor invited us who were visitors to join in that journey of that community and that congregation that day. Admittedly, she threw her well-prepared sermon aside on Saturday as she prepared to proclaim a message of faith to that worshiping community. I left that Sunday morning full of faith, even though I was not a part of that community. For the church was relevant, and that church got it right. And that is the characteristic that we're considering this week. The church that gets it right is relevant to those in the pew. I learned so much from that worship experience, and as I often did, I called the pastor and asked to meet with her, and each of us drove quite a few miles to meet for lunch. I asked her a simple question and listened to this second career pastors who shared that her understanding of her leadership was to intersect the life of those who were her flock with the gospel. The church, for her, was the vehicle that delivered the good news to the lives of people, and without that sense of intersection, she said the church was a noisy gong and a clanging cymbal. She shared that she set aside the prescribed lectionary for the day most often. That's a guide for pastors supplying text and subject for sermons throughout the year. Why did she abandon this very helpful resource? Because she was a second career pastor, knew from the perspective of the pew that the life of the church must begin with the lives of those in the pew. And if the church in its program and proclamation failed to intersect the lives of the community, the church would be an irrelevant routine in the lives of people. That phrase has stuck with me ever since that lunch. If the church fails to intersect the lives of the community of faith, it becomes an irrelevant routine. See, in this decade, we know what it means for the church to be relevant. Pope Francis is on a journey to intersect the life of the global community as well as national and local issues. He strives to be relevant, and when he is, the church gets it right. Why did he travel to Canada? To bring the message of faith, including confession and the witness of Jesus, to the indigenous Indian community in Canada, a sparse minority of the population, but whose heritage included the dehumanization of Indian children by the establishment called the church. What a witness to the truth that the church who gets it right is the church that is relevant in its proclamation, presence, and program. This characteristic of a pastor in a county seat town and the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, there's a common characteristic, and that is they were not sharing their opinion, they were sharing the gospel, the message revealed in the life and teachings of Jesus, empathetic and sacrificial love. You see, the relevant church is not rich in personal opinions. The relevant church majors in and is determined by the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, that is agape love. I was meeting with a group of laypersons, as I did annually and throughout my journey as a bishop. And we were in a district meeting, probably 100, 150 people there. I know the county seat church that we were meeting in was fairly full. And after the meeting, a person that I kept getting his eye, and he was looking at me, and he came up to me and shared that the best preaching was the preaching that if a person had trouble with the sermon, indeed they had a trouble with Jesus. And what that person was saying was, the church, to be relevant, brings the message of Jesus to the community of faith. You see, being relevant is not a license to assert personal opinions as the absolute truth. Being relevant is intersecting the life of the community with agape love. So if one has a problem with the message of the relevant church, they haven't got a problem with the preacher. They might have a problem with Jesus. What a word of wisdom from the pew. Yes, what does a pastor in a county seat town and the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church have in common? Jesus. That is why being relevant is a characteristic of the church that gets it right. Because agape love is relevant to every human condition and every issue human beings face. The human condition and every issue being faced by human beings are never neglected or ignored by the church who gets it right. Because the church that gets it right is always, in every case and in every time, relevant. For your thought and conversation, what are your own stories of the church being relevant? What are your stories of the church being irrelevant by ignoring the issues and concerns of the human community? Finally, what are your stories of leaders in the church, lay or clergy, using the church as a license to share personal opinions as the absolute truth rather than the church being the vehicle for delivering the good news of agape love? Thanks for being a part of our journey.